Welcome to another discussion with Ashton and Ayana. Ayana and Ashton at the Discomfort Club. Hey, Ashton.
Hey.
I'm glad we could get back together. We said from the beginning we're going to be doing this every couple months, and here we are. We've been able to stick with it, and
Here we are.
I'm so glad about it. So if you're joining us today, thank you so much. Whether you're watching from Facebook or LinkedIn, we appreciate you. Drop in the comments.
It has to be fun for us, and that means it has to be, these are serious discussions, but fun for you too. So please join in.
Yes. So please chime in. Let us know where you're watching live from. And also, I just want to remind you why we're doing this in the first place. So, selfishly, Ashton and I like to have these conversations, and we find them to be really encouraging for the both of us. But I think as we learn, we want to share. And so we want to build a community where we can do that together. And that includes whoever you are today watching with us. So I just want to remind you maybe about some commitments that I know I like to make when I'm doing the work that I'm doing. I know Ashton has her own, but I know we both would like participation. We would like a commitment to both respect and protect the integrity of the work that we're doing, because this is work. This is hard work in both learning and unlearning. And of course, we would love for you to share what you learn, but we want you to share what you learn in communities and in circles where you have influence. That's really important. So, Ashton, why don't you let me know what's going on with you before we jump right in? How have you been doing?
Summer somehow flashed by. I was lucky enough to spend 3 weeks just now in Japan. So I'm still a little jet lagged. It's an 11-hour time difference, mostly as a tourist, but also because I got this like totally random letter from a Japanese woman 2 years ago saying, I just read your book and it has to come to Japan and I'm going to translate it. She's a journalist and advocate. And she said, I experienced racism when I was living outside Japan. I experienced sexism because Japan is a very sexist culture, very gendered, huge gender wage gap, for example. And now I'm experiencing ageism. And she translated it. She found a publisher. Oh, here's a beautiful little thing. The publisher, it's this little outfit called Color, and they're starting a line of books called Breathing Books for George is sort of in memory of George Floyd.
Wow.
I can't breathe, because they feel that everyone obviously should be able to breathe, and they are publishing books that give breathing space. So I'm so honored to be part of that. And last Monday, as I'm sure you all know, was Respect for the Aged Day in Japan.
Oh, well, okay.
It's a thing. And
all right.
Just in time to do some promotion around that. And here, from a couple of Japanese acquaintances who've read the book, they said it gives me strength. It gives me confidence. It gives me courage. So I'm excited about that.
Well, I'm excited for you, and I'm excited for them too, and especially for you to have the opportunity to take your message global and to find global partners. That's huge. So congratulations.
Thank you. Still no France, no German, no Spanish. I mean, it's funny. It's like this litmus test. Not yet. I'm firmly convinced it's going to happen, but it is evidence, speaking of discomfort, of how uncomfortable so many places and people in the world still are with conversation around ageism in particular and bias in general.
Yeah, and bias in general. And I love that you brought that up, because recently, yesterday, actually, I did a workshop where we talked about unconscious bias and talk about being uncomfortable, talk about people experiencing discomfort. And so that brings us to what we're talking about today. We continue to sort of press the boundaries, right, of how much discomfort can we take, with the understanding that we believe discomfort is good. Discomfort actually helps us to grow. So wherever you are watching today, especially I think if you are watching on Facebook and LinkedIn, I think we can both see the comments. We'll see. Okay. Don't stop that. Don't let that keep you from participating. But I will say, if you have questions, if you have comments, please put them in the chat. As long as they're coming up, we will certainly honor them and address them. But I wanted to start out with sort of my own question to both you, Ashton, and the audience, and I'll certainly chime in on sort of the challenges we face when we're talking about bias, and specifically negative unconscious bias. That's bias that is unfair, it's inherent. Um, in many ways, it's illogical. What are some of the challenges maybe you've personally faced in confronting some of those blind spots you've had?
Um,
Audience, you too. I'd love to hear from you too. Maybe what are some of the challenges you faced in confronting your own bias?
I think, especially, and this is not an idea that's original to me, but especially if you are listening today, if you are working on your own bias, you want to think you're a good person. You want to
Mm,
think you're doing the right thing. And to that end, nobody wants to, it's really uncomfortable to acknowledge, gee, I'm stuck in this glue,
yeah,
as a lot of people. Yeah, and of course, comparing yourself to other people is never helpful.
it's not.
But because most bias is unconscious, we can't challenge bias unless we're aware of it. So, I mean, I hear things from you on this conversation. The one that's coming to my head from the last time you talked was your point that, no Black person represents all Black people. Well,
Yes.
duh. But
Yes.
I don't think I had heard it said so clearly. And it, once again, I guess I would say the hardest thing for me is being reminded all the damn time of how I would say, how oblivious I am to the way my whiteness, how
Mm,
whiteness is centered in the culture at large. I've never thought about having to represent all white people because,
yes.
you don't say, oh, I ran into my white friend at a party, but you might say I ran into my Black friend or my Latina friend, and, stuff like that, where I'm going, whoa, that, for the millionth time, I just didn't see that.
Yeah.
And, it makes me feel dopey, but then it also makes me feel good that at least I'm, making an effort to see it now.
Yes. I would say for me, I want to start with what you said there. Yeah, like it's uncomfortable and you might feel dopey, like you said, you might feel guilty or embarrassed. For me, I would feel shame in becoming aware, especially doing this work. And I want to be clear. Um Advocates, activists, we are always learning. So this does not mean we are without making mistakes. This doesn't mean, right, that we are perfect in our application of principles and how we work with people and how we learn from others. So for me, I will tell you that I was always would feel really small and inadequate, especially when people from non-Black communities would try to confront me with maybe information I didn't have as a Black person. And it would feel like, well, why don't you know this? Right. So I would feel a lot of shame. I would feel a lot of guilt. I would go inward. Um, so recognizing that, as well as recognizing some of the biases I had against people who looked like me too. And you and I have talked about colorism before and how, white supremacy culture is embedded in Black culture too, and in brown
I'd love
cultures
to
too.
hear more about how you encounter colorism and what you do.
Well, so first I want to explain what colorism is for people who might not understand. Like colorism in Black and brown communities is really an extension of white supremacy, where you are recognized as more favorable the lighter your skin is. The lighter your skin tone is, the more Eurocentric your features are, the more embraced you are, okay, by majority culture. And so that's pervasive in Black culture, but in brown communities too. You see that a lot in Indian communities.
Mm-hmm.
So being confronted with my own bias, understanding
Indian
this
as South
information.
Asian, right?
Yes, South
Yeah,
Asian. Thank you.
yeah, and that makes me think of this phrase I encountered along the paper bag test.
Ooh,
Talk
yes.
about that.
That's the real thing where, I mean, Black people, specifically in Jim Crow era, right? And before, were put to the test of the brown paper bag. Were you darker? Were you more fair skinned? For lots of folks, it was more acceptable to be fair skinned. So, there is a lot of undoing we have to do in many communities. So, being confronted with some new information and maybe even stereotypes that you yourself engaged in, these negative thoughts. When you think about confronting that, yes, shame, guilt, embarrassment, feeling dopey. However, the flip side of that, when you talked about, but also freeing to know yourself,
Yeah.
also freeing to have that information, that's the goal. That's the goal, is to learn new information. So,
Yeah. I mean, one of the helpful things I learned early on was that guilt is not helpful.
yes.
When what else did I read recently? Someone saying, I don't feel, it was in the someone in Australia, I think, about rights of Indigenous people, that I don't feel um, guilty for acts of racism that were carried out, centuries ago before I was born, but I feel accountable for addressing them in my life now. And that's different from
Yes.
guilt. Guilt just isn't helpful. And I think most
Yes.
therapists, I don't know, I'm not a therapist, but it just sends you down a wormhole that, and I don't, is shame the same?
Yeah, well, listen, I don't think that it just sends you down a wormhole. It does that to guilt, shame, embarrassment, right? Especially when you are confronted with it around other people, right? You don't just go down a wormhole. I think what happens is it stops any progress. It stops the work. It stops us from confronting these issues because we don't know how to respond. We feel guilty about maybe our lack of knowledge. We shrink, right? So, again, I think that's why it's so important that we have these conversations in a forum like this where we can share information. You and I aren't claiming to be the experts. We are claiming to be activists. we are claiming to be maybe awkward in our approach sometimes, but
Fellow
learning,
muddlers.
yes, learning nonetheless. So, let's see. I do have a couple of. Go ahead. You were going to
Yeah.
say something just while I put something up here.
Yeah, great question from Lori Joe. Hey, Lori, whose biggest issue is how to tell white folks that discomfort is required for uncovering your bias. That is a good one. Do you have professional advice on that, Ayana?
I'll
So I can
I'll tell
collect
you
some thoughts on
because
that
she's not.
representation.
I can tell you what I think about it.
Yeah.
Hi, Lori. She says my biggest issue is how to tell white folks that discomfort is required. Just like that. Tell them. Tell them. I think part of the reason that we have such a hard time lining up our actions with our insides, okay, is that we don't want to be ostracized. And so when we talk about some of the challenges about confronting our own bias, is that we see it in other people too, but we don't know how to respond. And we want to respond in a way that, I don't know how else to say it, that helps us to save face, that doesn't make people not like us, that doesn't make people upset with us, that doesn't make people not want to invite us to parties because we're the downer and we're always bringing up stuff that make people uncomfortable. um
Especially women who are socialized to be polite and to grease the
yes,
social wheels.
yes. um
I,
that
I
is an issue, but
yeah,
it's going to be an existing issue.
I mean, I'm like always very rational and logical, which is not all that helpful because emotions are what affect us. You're talking here about emotions.
Yeah.
But perhaps if you're having this conversation or even thinking about it with someone, they would agree that society, that there is bias in society, right? That it, I mean, a classic one is, do you think, how many white people would change places? What's that famous social experiment with, with black people? Well, what's that about? We
Yes.
know that, most of us know that white people have an advantage in many arenas. Um,
Hmm.
so if they it's and nothing change, so that's the norm, right? And
Yes.
changing the norm is uncomfortable no matter what the norm is in any relationship, and the stakes are higher in a collective sphere, in a social
Yeah.
sphere, especially in social media where, X thousand strangers are going to say, I can't believe you got that wrong and I'm unfollowing
Mhm.
you.
So
But
there's being ostracized again
yeah,
is a real
but
challenge.
nothing changes if we all stay comfortable, and there's a way to do it that isn't, that doesn't do gotcha. I mean, I know a good way to do it is to start the comment or the conversation in shared experience. I just learned that one Black person doesn't represent all Black people, or whatever the thing is. So you come from a place of shared ignorance, which I certainly
Yeah,
feel like Ayana or I'm doing all the time. I just learned this stuff, or
yeah,
I just put my foot in my mouth
yes,
and it felt weird, but here's what I got out of it. Or maybe even leave that second part out, but come from a point of view of shared ignorance and
yeah,
shared desire, and say it I was embarrassed, or I
yeah,
wish I knew that, so
yeah.
that you're not saying this isn't going to happen, but you're saying we can work through it and there are rewards.
Yes. And I think there is, again, specifically when you are having these conversations, we're trying to engage with people who we already know, right? I
Mhm.
might not be having these really emotionally charged conversations with somebody I don't know, certainly not on the street with people I don't know or who may be, dangerous for me. But certainly in my friend groups, in my familial groups, I should be able to address some of these things even if they are uncomfortable. And I'm going to put up just I see a comment from Connie on Facebook, and Connie says, "Answer to your prompt. Courage to not color my hair and feeling comfortable with my changed appearance." Woo! So that's your challenge. I was asking, for those of you who are just joining, welcome. I was asking, what are some of the challenges you faced in confronting your own bias? And so, Connie, I feel like what you're saying is you had to confront how you felt about aging. Ashton, you and I have talked about this many times. I'm like, listen, I'm gonna keep color in this hair, okay? Um,
And
yeah.
no judgment. I mean, especially in the arena of women and appearance. I sort of have a blanket rule not to even go there, which is not to say thank you for your question, Connie. Uh, but there are so many voices out there telling us older women what we should wear, what we shouldn't wear, what we should say, shouldn't say, and we each need to do this stuff in our own way and in our own times. I urge people to think about their own reactions to a friend who stops coloring her hair, because I know that the harshest critics of
Mhm,
women's appearances are other women,
mhm.
especially older women. And all we do when we comment, and especially when we criticize, is dig the hole deeper and reinforce the idea that the most important thing about us is what we look like. So maybe just try and not say anything, just say, hey, good to
You
see
know
you.
what? I'm practicing that because you, in the nicest way possible, said maybe around the first time, like, shut the F up and stop asking about it. I was like, yeah, you're right. You're right. I mean, that's the short answer, right? Is like, why are we so obsessed with what other people choose to do? And aging is natural. I want to ask you something because you are, the aging to me. Okay. I know you'll say I'm always learning too, but you are the person that I would think about as the aging activist and the expert in this area.
On
So,
ageism,
on
not aging.
ageism,
Yes.
I'm sorry. So I am noticing more and more brands are sort of taking this approach of, let's be fine with aging. We embrace aging, but I almost feel like it's fraudulent because they're also, highly editing photos of people who they are saying,
Yeah.
this
They're,
person.
they're still selling you shit.
Okay, they're still selling the bullshit.
Yeah.
Say it right.
And um, there is, I recommend, I'll put it in the chat, a wonderful Substack by a beauty culture critic named Jessica DeFino, who goes right mercilessly and really intelligently into the roots of beauty culture in dissatisfaction with ourselves and into capitalism. And I think
Mhm.
an analogy for that's relevant to almost all of us is the diet industry. And fat
Yes.
phobia and ageism are deeply intertwined, and all this stuff is, again, of course, deeply gendered. So they're selling, okay, I mean, there's all this makeup to make you look natural, like you didn't have any makeup on. Well,
Right.
guess what? There's a cheaper way to do it, which is not to buy any of the crap to start with. I mean, and I'm not saying never buy any skincare products.
Right.
But watch out, because they're always trying to sell something, because no one makes money off satisfaction if people are not, don't mind the fact that, God forbid, their thighs rub together, or, their face wrinkles when they smile.
Yeah.
No one can profit off our insecurities. If
Yes.
we do, it's not easy. None of this is easy, Connie. Believe me, I'm not saying that, but we have to agree to the terms. If they are going to take advantage of our insecurities, we have to agree to it. We have to buy the stuff. So we do have agency, and that happens bit by bit. I mean, look at how many women stopped coloring their hair to cover the gray during
Yeah.
the pandemic. If you
Yeah.
want to color your hair to cover the gray, go ahead. Not saying that, but it gave people collective power
Yeah.
to do that,
Or not
and
do that.
or not do that.
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, I know everyone in the world thinks I color my hair, which I don't, but think about why it matters to you, and whether you would think less of me if I did color my hair. And maybe I'm lying. I mean, I never believed Ronald Reagan was saying he never dyed his hair, and I'm like, right. But why should it matter? Why is my appearance so important?
And
And who's doing the criticizing?
can't we apply that question to every characteristic of a person? That's like, why should somebody's race matter? Why should somebody's gender matter? Why, for the love of God, why are we so obsessed with who people sleep with and how they sleep with one another? Why does that matter?
Yeah.
So I think there
My
is
son gave
something.
me a really good tip. I was at a
What?
party, and there was a South Asian woman, and she had the most gorgeous skin. It was like she was glowing. And I really wanted to compliment her, but I had the wisdom to shut the fuck up. And I asked my son about it, and he said his rule is to never compliment anyone about something they can't change about themselves.
Mm.
And I thought that was good.
Yeah.
Maybe I mean, and why, and
Yeah.
again, to like go deeper, like just, you look great, or that color really suits you, something like that.
Period.
Period.
Yeah. I like that too, because yesterday when I was having a conversation, we talked about how microaggression, okay, from the point of view of the perpetrator, the aggressor, um, most times, many times, oftentimes they have no idea they've said something wrong, and how something as seemingly harmless as complimenting someone on their complexion or on their hair really can expose you as being ignorant in so many ways.
Just drawing attention to it, needless
Yes.
comments about age in the
Yes.
workplace. People, young, oh, you're the youngest person on the team, or whatever. Don't say it.
Yeah.
What does it do?
Yeah, and what's the end result? Why do you say it? I want to just put up a quick comment here for
Or good
Rosanna. She says, Rosanna, hi, Rosanna. Rosanna is watching us from Facebook Live, and she says, a flight attendant recently asked me if my gray was natural. A lot of people think it's highlights. I think it's kind of cool that people appreciate my gray, though I admit I still miss my darker hair. You can always go back, though, right? Okay.
That's true. You can't.
You can do whatever you want with your damn body.
Yeah. I mean, I have my cousin's daughter is transitioning, and he's super upset that they're taking hormones, and they can stop. It's not like surgery. A lot of this stuff we're all in transition all the time. And I think, thank you for, the vulnerable admission. There are losses. I mean, I don't know how many of you get my newsletter, but I wrote about giving up and this is mortifying to admit, but I had like a boy bike. I've always ridden a boy bike. And this is like mortifying, but it made me feel like more sporty and more, I don't know, adventurous or more badass, which is absurd. But I got harder and harder to lift my leg up over the seat. And so a friend gave me, a bike. What do they call it? A step through frame, which is PS. What every bike free bike rental. Every city bike program in the world has them because everyone can use them.
Yes.
And I was talking to a friend and she said, oh, that's so, but I did experience it as a loss. I felt sort of staid and stuffy now in my upright bike with the basket, like the little old lady going to the market. Yes, that phrase,
Mm.
little old lady, came out of my mouth. But I talked to a younger friend who lives in San Francisco, which is super hilly. And she said, that's so funny because I had a regular bike and I just got a step through with the basket, an electric bike. And she said, I feel kick-ass on that thing. So it's in our heads.
I've literally never had a bike that wasn't a step through frame, for real. But I'm also 5'2".
Nothing to be proud of.
Who knew? So welcome again. If you are just now joining us, whether you're watching from Facebook or LinkedIn, you are joining us for the Discomfort Club. We'd love to hear your questions, your comments. What are some of the things that are making you uncomfortable? We started out with a question about sort of what are the challenges of recognizing our own bias. And so I want to switch gears now and then talk about how discomfort then can also be good in many ways, but more specifically, how does it inspire personal growth? How has it inspired personal growth for you, Ashton?
Well, I think that story, and also the anecdote about the person who, thinks her likes her gray hair, but also misses the dark. I think talking about loss is uncomfortable. And I think a lot of people, when they first get the memo about ageism or start getting older and realize, yeah, there are things that I miss, but I don't want to go back to my youth and so on. It's easy for the pendulum to swing the other way and to say, everything's great. Everything's going to be fine if I eat enough kale, or do my sit-ups or whatever. And loss inevitably, there's only two inevitable losses: of people you've known all your life and of physical capacity. But there's other losses too. And to accept that, it's not ageist or bias to accept that. It's denial to pretend they don't happen. And I think that is a complex and often uncomfortable reality. And it's important to acknowledge the loss and mourn the loss. And that can make people uncomfortable in our hyper-capitalist, appearance-oriented world, where to appear to age or not, run the mile as fast as you used to is seen as a defeat, when it's not. It's fantastic that you're still trying to run, at all, or that I get up on the damn bicycle. And I don't mean to restrict the examples to physical achievement either, and to look always at both sides of the coin, the advantages as well.
Yeah. So I'd say too, the discomfort and personal growth for me really does force me to look at somebody else's perspective, forces me to think about what somebody else's reality is. But I also think that you would have to have a desire to know where your shortcomings are, right? I don't think that, we go into being uncomfortable on purpose because we're like, I'm gonna get this personal growth. I don't think that that's what happens. But I think the more we seek to understand other people, the more we understand ourselves. And I think that it can be inherently uncomfortable to learn about other people.
And I even think understanding is a high goal, just to appreciate, oh, it's different for them.
Period.
This is new data.
Yes, this is new information. So I'm always asking people to challenge themselves. When that first thought comes up, whatever that negative thought is, whatever that super unfair and judging thought is, okay? Ask yourself why you thought that, and ask yourself if it's true. Ask yourself if it is true in that minute, in that moment. I think that has been really helpful for me in thinking about how discomfort has helped me grow. It forces me to think about what I think about.
There's a good example. Maybe you want to read Melody Stark's sort of, I don't want to call it a trick, but a way she challenges those assumptions about another person from clicking into place.
This is it. We're going to be covered a little bit, but everybody, I want you to see this.
We're still here.
About. Okay. Yeah, so let me just read it really quick. Thank you, Melody, for joining us. Melody says, we were talking again about sort of the challenges that we face. She says it's teaching ourselves to be aware of our awareness. For example, I have to keep going.
Work from home.
Oh, I work from. Mm, okay, I work from home and have the TV on for background din. Okay, for backgrounding. If a news story comes on and it states the name and perhaps the role of a person being interviewed, I check in with how I automatically picture that person before I look. My conditioned brain is often surprised, though I'm glad that is getting to be less and less. Doing a self check in has been helpful. My conditioned brain will hear we will interview Riley Jones, CEO. Okay, and you are like putting that in your mind already. Yes. You know what else? I can't remember if I brought this up here or not, but for those of you who love to read, years ago I read a statement from someone who was talking about bias, who was talking about our natural inclination, okay, to center whiteness, to call whiteness the norm, okay? And she said, for those of you who read fiction, did you realize that most of us, when we are reading fiction, unless someone explicitly tells us, we picture the characters as white people? When she said that, I had to go back in my mind and think about almost every book that I've read. And I was like, yeah, yeah, until they tell me explicitly that this person looks like me or is not white. I think, especially if it's a white author, I'm almost automatically assuming from a white perspective. Yes. So the think about what you think about, and that awareness is key. I do love that.
Yeah, that reminds me. I belong to a book club and one of the books we read last year, well, that centers black writers, is Toni Morrison's only short story, which is called recitative. I'm not even sure how to say it, and she wrote it deliberately. It's the story of a friendship between two women, and you can't tell who's white and who's black. And it most people assume, as you just pointed out, that the gender is, I mean, first of all, first question is, why does it matter so much? Why is this like an itch we have to scratch as we're reading it?
Yep.
Which is, I think, what Melody's talking about, challenging your sort of your awareness there. What are you aware of and why? But she wrote it as a puzzle, and there's no where you're like, oh, that's definitely, the way a black person's experience, or the way a white person would put it. So it's a good exercise. I'll just put the name in the
yes, please do put it there. Yeah, so I think that again, awareness can really drive our personal growth from, if we're talking about being uncomfortable first, because all of those lessons help us. I always say we don't like to make mistakes, but sometimes mistakes are the greatest teachers, for real. Like, you make a mistake and you might not ever make it again, because the embarrassment of it will make certain that you don't make that mistake again. But I also caution you too, don't let the embarrassment of that mistake, whatever that mistake is, keep you from growing. That can be a vehicle for
I
growth.
think you grow no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
I've even heard a Darwinian explanation for that we, like, you forget compliments, and I can remember mean things girls said to me in 8th grade. And man, I don't want that cluttering up my brain, but there they are, because I was at a formative stage or whatever. But we remember harm and danger more than we remember positive stuff, supposedly, because it's an evolutionary benefit. The rock that you were sunning yourself on, where a bird of prey almost came down and grabbed you, is more important to avoid than the rock where you had a nice sunbathe, right? So maybe there is some reason for it. I think another point is not to try to not let the discomfort, the embarrassment be, not try to not have the lesson be, I don't want to do that again.
Yes.
Right. But now I've learned from that, and I won't make that mistake again. I'll make a different one.
Right. Number one, I'm going to make a different one, guaranteed. But also, I'm not going to let that mistake be in vain either. I'm going to share that with somebody I trust, and somebody who I have their ear and who I have their support. Yes.
Sorry. I just popped that up there by accident. Sorry about that.
That's okay. I want to read it. What does Kathy say? Hi, Kathy. Kathy is watching from LinkedIn, and she says, at the same time, to not ostracize, we need to also let people know that the discomfort is temporary and the learning is so important that it's worth going through the discomfort. Yes, it helps you to grow. Yes, Kathy. Thank you. The other thing I wanted to say, Ashton,
That speaks to Lori's point too. You will get over it. The
you,
discomfort is transitory.
but listen, you might not get over it. You might not get over it if you let the guilt, the shame, and the embarrassment keep you stuck. And by the way, if you let it keep you stuck, it's because you are censoring yourself. It is because you are censoring yourself. Okay. So we have to remember that too, which, circling back really quickly, when you said, I can remember these things that were said to me in middle school. They're scarring for me. Like, I remember what that felt like. Yes, all of us can. I challenge you, myself, okay, and everyone watching today, remember the times where you were the perpetrator, because that is a valuable learning experience too. Remember the times when you were the perpetrator of that unfairness, that ugliness, that stereotyping. Remember that time too. Because that's also a valuable learning experience. It really is. So I'm really interested in hearing what some of you have to say about how your own discomfort has inspired your personal growth. And while you think about doing that, and Ashton, most certainly, if you see another comment that needs to go up, go ahead and put it up. But as we're talking about that, part of our goal here is to continue to have these conversations that help us to be brave, that help us to do and say things that help us to be more progressive, more inclusive, more welcoming, more compassionate of others, of folks specifically outside of our own social networks and groups. And so, in thinking about that, I'm reading a book right now, okay, by Catherine Sanderson. It's called Why We Act. Maybe it's looking backwards on here, but it's called Why We Act. And the book is about learning how to be an upstander, okay, and not just a bystander, but really having the courage to stand up in the face of injustice, discrimination, bullying. Okay. And in her book, she brings up this quote by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And he says, history will have to record the greatest tragedy of this period of social transition was not the strident clamor of the bad people, but the appalling silence of the good people. Now, listen, this was written in 1955, but don't it fit in for today? We have to get out of our own way and stop centering our own comfort. So I just wonder, in what ways are some of you engaging in uncomfortable conversations outside of our group here, right? That we're only doing once every couple months. How are you engaging in uncomfortable conversations with folks in your community?
Or what's keeping you from doing it?
Or are you doing it at all? Yes. Why aren't you? Yes.
We got on 5 minutes early to touch base, and I was saying to Ayana, I can speak out because I'm self-employed. And you said, yeah, that's one big reason why I quit my job. Yes. I think it's always important to acknowledge that not everyone is in a position to speak out. I mean, I remember the time I was giving a talk and I was a little more judgy about specifically dyeing hair to cover the gray. And a woman came up to me. She was gracious enough to do it privately, not as a question in front of the audience. But she said, you don't get it. If I didn't dye my hair, my boss would realize how old I am and he'd fire me, and I have children to support. And boy, I never forgot that. Because, and that's, her race, her ethnicity is irrelevant. That was a human experience for anyone who is responsible for the economic well-being of anyone else. And that's an awful lot of people. And try and, put yourself in their shoes if you can, but if you can't, just acknowledge their shoes are different from yours. And, you need to learn more, and there's information everywhere.
There is. Listening is a really important part of your own personal growth. It really is listening to the experiences of other people and really making a conscious and intentional effort to do that regularly. Learn about the people around you. I think that, especially in the workplace, when we talk about not just diversity, but when we talk about inclusion, when we talk about building multiracial, multicultural workplaces, people don't like to tell the truth about it, but the reason that that's really difficult to do is because people's personal networks are not diverse. They are not inclusive. And we go to our personal networks to fill those professional positions sometimes. That's why boards look the way they do. Okay. That's why you see a bunch of white folks on boards and in executive positions, because when there's an opening, yeah, they're going to tap somebody they know, and they don't know nobody that looks not like them. So we have to do things with intention. Listen to other people's experiences and then say to yourself, maybe, how can I positively impact the people who are in my community and who are outside of my community? What do I need to learn? Um, we have to be asking ourselves these questions if we are serious about building progressive communities where every person fits in, period. I think that we have to be asking some tough questions of ourselves. And so I go back to the question that I've asked the audience.
Can I just say, not, that's a really high bar where every person fits in. Just, even if it's just to bring on, a few more people, or bit by bit, or, this
Start somewhere.
starts somewhere. This is incremental. I read a survey of a bunch, I think it was UK based, and I think it was people in the advertising or marketing field. But what most of the respondents said was the biggest barrier to being more proactive about bias in their workplace was, quote, fear of getting it wrong.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to get it wrong. The only really terrible, I don't even know if it's a mistake, but is to not try at all. And again, in the workplace, the stakes can be really high. If you have, if a bunch of people are going to watch you, but and then you might feel like your job is less secure because you didn't say it exactly the right way and Mrs. Peabody complained about it.
Right.
That's why it's so important for people at the top of organizations to embody these values. But I think there are ways to say, listen, I'm going to go out on a limb and say this. And I probably, I could use some guidance if I said it wrong. I gave a talk almost a year ago now, for the California Department of the Aging, which is doing this fantastic coalition around older people and people with disabilities, which is they are not the same, but they overlap.
They do.
And it was exciting because there were tons of people with visible and probably invisible disabilities in the audience. And I said, I don't, I do identify as disabled in some contexts because I'm deaf in one ear, but I said, I'm sure I'm going to get things wrong, and please tell me about it.
Yes.
And, and I didn't say that to exonerate myself. I said, I think also people do understand intent.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
I think so too.
Right. And please let me know if I said something that rubbed you the wrong way, or if I could have said it better.
So that's also part of the learning and the growing, is we have to have a willingness to be wrong in front of other people. And I think that's very hard for people in positions of leadership, but
Yeah.
we have to be able to be wrong, and we have to express vulnerability. So even saying, hey, I'm going to go out on a limb here, I might get this wrong. That's really hard for people to do, especially people who are not just in positions of leadership, but people who are in positions of authority. Authority and leadership are not the same. And people who are in positions of authority, but who may not be good leaders, they have a very hard time being vulnerable. You'll never get to a place of inclusion when people cannot be truthful, when people cannot share their experiences, when people are afraid to speak up. Vulnerability is as important as being uncomfortable. And in fact, your vulnerability will lead to your discomfort. But if we hold on, we already have said that that's also an opportunity for growth. It really is. So I'm going to go back through here and look at some of our comments. But again, we really want to hear from you. Again, Ashton and I are not saying we are the experts on all of these things. We are saying that we think in order for us to have productive conversations, we need to have them in a way that really helps the collective express their thoughts. So please share with us. Let's see here. I think I got something from Lori about hair. Hair is such a big comment that I just want to find it. Here it is. Okay. Lori says, I just learned that it's shitty to ask questions about a Black woman's hair. Girl, I don't do that anymore. I felt so uncomfortable. It felt so uncomfortable to hear. Yes. So imagine, Lori, okay, how uncomfortable it would feel as the only Black woman, okay, in a corporate office setting, okay, for people to ask her about her hair every time her hair changes, every time she does something new with it. If it's uncomfortable for you to learn about, think about how uncomfortable it was for Black folks in the workplace to be, all of a sudden be giving a dissertation about, what their hair is like, how often they wash it.
Why is it such a thing? Why
I'm
are
gonna tell you why I think it's such a thing.
obsessed? Yeah, see, I'm just asking. I should know.
No, but this is the forum for us to ask, right? So first of all, Lori, I'm going to say, I think the caveat is you can ask when you are in relationship with someone, when you have a friendship with someone. So Lori, you and I are friends. If you ask me about my hair, girl, I'm going to tell you. Okay. But the thing is you should not ever ask any person anything that you don't know, a person that you're not in a relationship with. Hair is a big deal, mostly because, for centuries, white folks have continued to let Black people know that their hair is not acceptable the way that it grows out of their hair, or, the way that it grows out of their head, the natural way their hair grows. So it can be really uncomfortable when people start asking you about your hair because automatically you feel othered. How come you didn't ask Cindy Lou about her hair? Okay. No, you're going to come and ask me about mine. And I understand that a lot of times it comes from a true place of curiosity, but the internet is real. Go find out. Don't be asking me in the workplace, because now I feel uncomfortable. And, I literally worked in an office where this woman brought several people down to my office, okay, to look at my hair, to ask about my hair. How much did my hair cost? How long did it take? And you know what? I answered all the questions. I did. I didn't answer because I wanted to. I answered because I felt uncomfortable. I felt that not answering might make me somehow seem like I was not being a team player. I felt all the things that people who are experiencing microaggressions on a regular basis feel. I just didn't have language to use at that time.
Yeah. And I just read an article, I can't remember where, but about it turns out that many of the chemicals used in hair straightening products are carcinogenic.
Yes.
So there's this class action suit filed by a bunch of African American women.
Yes.
Of course, it's not that simple, because there's a whole discourse, probably mostly on TikTok, but of Black women resenting being told that they shouldn't straighten their hair.
Yeah.
And the hair is so loaded. We're cycling back again to
specifically Black hair. Black hair.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because I learned it. My sister's nieces went to school in a majority Black school in Cleveland. And I learned from my sister, like, Black hair is a thing. Oh, here's an embarrassing story, also from a friend, but she adopted a Black girl. And she basically expected, like she said, how do I learn how to, treat her hair? And Black people said, figure it out, just figure it out.
Yeah. Some people will be helpful, but some people will be like, listen.
Yeah.
Go find out.
Go find out. Yeah.
Go find out.
And
yeah, I will say too that think about, again, when we talk about capitalism, we could talk about capitalism, classism, and racism together. Okay, we really
Always.
could. When you think about this class action lawsuit that's going on with really it's perms, and like my perm is different from your perm. Your perm makes your hair curly. The kind of perms that Black women use make our hair straight. All right, they have been known to cause cancer. And so, when you talk about the discourse, sometimes it's on TikTok, you will hear people say, well, why would you even chance that? Why would you even put something on your scalp that might do that? Why do you think? Why do you think? Because people are ostracized for wearing their hair the way it grows out of their scalp. They're seen as dirty or unkempt or nappy, all the words that have no business coming out of your mouth if you are a non-Black person. And so think about what the workplace might be like for women who do not conform to Eurocentric standards. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's rough out here in these streets, y'all. It really is. So I want to put up something from Lynn. Hi, Lynn. Lynn is watching on LinkedIn, and she says, I think the lesson that was the hardest for me to learn as an educator was behaviorism. Ooh, we could talk about that prison, the pipeline another time, Lynn, but yes, assuming because I saw a certain behavior from a kid to always expect that behavior. Yes. I'm going to tell you something that, will maybe be a revelation to some of you, and maybe some of you will be like, I think that I think that for a lot of white folks, okay, they want to be seen as individuals. All right, they are very individualistic, but man, they want to see everybody else as the collective and as the stand-in for everyone else.
For
So
other groups.
yes, yes. So there's a lot of research on bias and discrimination in the education system, specifically, and in our justice system too. Um, how do we change any of this? By being aware, by having conversations like this, by being willing to hear new information. And when something you hear makes you uncomfortable, being able to sit in that and ask yourself some rational questions.
As you are doing, Lynn, there's actually a phenomenon. I don't like it when people say that there's like, that ageism, that there's youthism against younger people. Any judgment on the basis of age is ageism, but there is a phenomenon called adultification. It's an ugly word, but it is the phenomenon in a white supremacist society of treating Black kids as
Yes,
older than they are. That
yes,
then we would treat an equivalent white kid of the same age, giving them more responsibility when it comes to girls sexualizing, seeing younger Black African American girls as sexual beings when we would not think the same of a white girl the same age,
right.
and thinking with older boys. I mean, it's horrible that it's so gendered and predictable, but attributing adult responsibilities and violence to a young Black kid, as we see in, obviously Trayvon Martin, and young Black adolescents going about their business that are
Tamir
perceived to
Rice.
be
Yes.
criminal and having criminal intent. I want to say just because they're not white, but I actually will say that.
Yeah, you should say that because that's what it is. That's what it is. And so we have to be able to confront these things. And again, I hope that you all, as you're joining us every couple months, that every time you join us, you'll have the courage to have conversations with your friends. Have conversations with your family members, okay? Have conversations with people who you know, who you trust, and who you have their respect. I will just reiterate how important this is. I feel like every time we see a shooting, okay, I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, but I think about the shootings that recently happened at the Dollar General, okay, where this young man tried to go onto a campus. Every time I hear about the shooter, I have to tell you that I'm pissed off because you know damn well that there was somebody in that person's life who knew they had been radicalized, who knew they were expressing these kinds of feeling towards people from other communities, and who didn't say anything, who didn't do anything. who didn't contact the authorities until it was too late. Talk to your people. Talk to your people. Talk to people in your communities and in your families. When people have these extreme viewpoints, these ideologies that are racist in nature, that are harmful, it's too easy for other people, specifically people in communities of color, white folks, to say, well, I don't feel like that. So they give these people a pass. I'm going to cut this person out of my life. That's not fair. That's not fair. Because you cut them out of your life. But guess what? My kids got to deal with them. My kids got to deal with them on the street. My kids have to deal with them in schools. My kids have to deal with them in stores. And you get to distance yourself.
Your kids are in danger because of it.
Literal danger. I have a 17-year-old who's learning how to drive right now. We've had all the conversations already about what to do when you get pulled over. This is real. So we have to have the courage to have these conversations whenever possible. And to your point, Ashton, we aren't always going to be able to have them. We're not always going to be able and in a position to have them in corporate settings for sure. But by God, have them with the people who are in your circles and in your networks. Please.
Looking at the calendar, I realized that if we do our 2-month thing, the next Discomfort Club will fall on Thanksgiving Day.
Oh,
it's not going to happen, but we'll figure it out.
We'll figure it out. Yeah.
Always discourses about how to deal with, racist Uncle Milton.
Oh my goodness.
At Thanksgiving dinner. And I usually end up hosting. I'm waiting for my kids to acquire spouses and big houses so I can get invited, but that hasn't happened yet. So I'm still stuck. And I like having a grab bag of whoever is available. But I realized last year that we never talked at these dinners about the appalling history of Thanksgiving in the forced removal and extermination of Indigenous people. And I thought, how can it doesn't feel okay not to say anything anymore. And I came up with what worked pretty well. And we went around the table and we waited till the first course, till people were stuffed. Or semi-stuffed pre-dessert. So I wasn't between them and the cranberry sauce. And I asked people to bring in advance one fact that they hadn't known about the people on whose land they lived or worked.
Yeah.
But if it were, and then I was very pleased with myself because it was a really fruitful discussion and people could talk short or long or whatever. But now I'm wondering, it's coming up again. Mm-hmm. What do I do? Which is just what do I ask of myself? What do I ask of my guests? And I don't have an answer, but maybe we meet before Thanksgiving and talk about that, because that's uncomfortable too.
Yeah, let's plan on that. Let's see if we can meet before Thanksgiving. I think that would be good. And you know what? While we're talking about Thanksgiving, and obviously around that time we'll be celebrating or acknowledging Native American Heritage Month. Also, it's Hispanic Heritage Month right now. Learn something on purpose. One of the reasons I love TikTok is because there are so many opportunities to learn from different communities there and experts. Go find something out on purpose about somebody else. And when you find something out, tell someone else and think about your own response. And we'll close just with this. Let me see. Hi, Kyra. Kyra says, with the corporate setting, it can be very difficult for Black women who choose not to chemically treat their hair. Will I be seen as a professional if I choose to wear certain natural styles? Listen. Yeah. Yes. If I show up in an afro, is it going to be okay? Or is somebody going to ask me why I didn't do my hair? Is somebody going to reach out and try to touch it? And
or then I have to, oh, that's different.
Yes, it's all of these things. So I think we should continue to have these conversations because they are good. And again, they're learning opportunities. So we have just a couple minutes left. Would love to hear from you again too. If you learned anything new, especially if you've been with us before in these conversations, let me know what you've learned. And then if you have any commitments for yourself, maybe I'll have a challenge for you, okay? We will be meeting again in November. We've already said we'll probably meet before Thanksgiving, so maybe the Thursday before, we'll work that out. But if I could pose a challenge to all of you who are on right now, who are watching, my challenge would be for you to be able to rise to the occasion when you have the opportunity to have one of these maybe uncomfortable conversations with someone in your social network, whether that be a family member or a friend or a neighbor. Have it. Have it. Realizing that you don't have to have all the answers. And I really liked one of your ways of connecting, Ashton, was in sharing maybe some of your own challenges you've had in the past and saying something like, I used to think that way too until. So I'm going to ask you to do that. Thank you for all of you who have shown up. Yes, Lori, love you too. Let's see. I learned about the whys behind not commenting. We listen, we could have so many conversations about Black women's hair. Okay. I don't want to center Black women's hair in this conversation every time, but there is so much to be said. Y'all just ask me because I already told you I left I left a corporate place because it was just too much. We could talk about that in the future. But until then, if there are no other questions, let me see. When you know better, you do better. That's right, Connie. Thank you. Until next time, listen, everybody, I'm going to put my email here in the chat. It's aking@getmaxcoms.com. If you have questions, if there are topics that you would like for us to bring up in future episodes, again, me and Ashton can do this on our own because we could talk all day. We want you to be engaged. We want to hear from you too because this is a learning opportunity for all of us. So, any parting words, Ashton?
No, I mean, we learn from you. We are all works in progress. God knows.
Yep. So until then, y'all keep doing the work and we'll see you next time.